Say a poor little boy surprises the world by piloting an airplane in the middle of an emergency. Ignored by everyone, he takes control after the pilots become incapacitated. With courage and self-taught knowledge, he saves dozens of lives in an impossible landing. His feat is so impressive that the president himself decides to honor him with an unforgettable gift. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The plane was slowly taxiing down the runway while Tyler looked out the window with tears in his eyes. His 12 years carried the maturity of someone who knew life's difficulties well, but at that moment, he was just a boy fulfilling his greatest dream. Sitting beside him, Sarah observed her son with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Every penny saved during years of cleaning houses, every piece of clothing bought at thrift stores, every simplified meal, everything had been worth it to see. That sparkle in her son's eyes. "Mom, look at the flap of the 737-800. It moves exactly like I saw in the simulator," exclaimed Tyler, pointing to the wing with contained enthusiasm. Sarah smiled even without completely understanding. The small apartment they shared in the Chicago suburbs was decorated with magazine clippings about aviation that Tyler collected from the trash cans of newsstands. On the peeling walls, technical drawings of aircraft coexisted with emergency procedure tables that the boy meticulously copied from online videos using the free internet at the municipal library. "We'll take off in 15 minutes, informed the flight attendant, a young woman with a rehearsed smile who barely looked at the two as she passed. Sarah adjusted her son's seatbelt and then her own, her rough hands revealing years of manual labor. In the seat ahead, a man in an impeccable suit was talking on the phone, ignoring the announcements to turn off electronic devices. "I'm boarding for Miami now. The negotiation needs to be closed today. I don't care what happens," he said with an authoritative voice. When the flight attendant approached to ask him to turn off the device, he showed irritation, but obeyed with visible displeasure. "That's Richard Mitchell, Mom," whispered Tyler. "I read about him in a magazine. He owns a hotel chain and has a private jet." "Shh, son. It's not polite to comment about others," Sarah gently reprimanded, although she too had recognized the businessman from economic reports. The plane began to move more quickly down the runway. Tyler closed his eyes for a moment, feeling every vibration, every sound. This was his first time on a real plane, but it seemed like he had been there hundreds of times before. On cold nights on his mattress on the floor, he imagined this moment while studying technical manuals downloaded as free PDFs. The takeoff was perfect, and Tyler observed everything with the attentive eyes of an expert. As Chicago was left behind, transforming into a mosaic of buildings and avenues, he felt that he was also leaving behind years of limitations. For 2.5 hours, he would be in the air, in the only place where he had always wanted to be. That's when he noticed it. The subtle vibration, different from the normal pattern, a high-pitched sound, almost imperceptible, coming from the left engine. Tyler frowned. He recognized that pattern from the failure simulators he obsessively studied. "Mom," he murmured, leaning toward Sarah. "Something's wrong with the engine." Sarah, who was trying to get some sleep after weeks of double shifts to complete the money for the tickets, opened her eyes. "It must be normal, son. It's our first time flying, remember?" But Tyler knew it wasn't normal. His fingers nervously drummed on the armrest while he tried to gather courage. Finally, he stood up and called the passing flight attendant. "Excuse me, ma'am. The left engine has an abnormal vibration and is emitting an intermittent, high-pitched sound. It could be a failure in the turbine or compressor." The flight attendant looked at the skinny boy with simple clothes and worn-out sneakers and smiled condescendingly. "Don't worry, little one. Planes make strange noises sometimes. It's totally normal." "But it's not normal," insisted Tyler, his voice becoming firmer. "Listen to the sound pattern. It's an indication of—" "Hey, kid," interrupted Richard Mitchell, turning in his seat. "Can you stop bothering everyone with your theories? Some of us are trying to rest." Tyler's face burned with shame as several passengers turned to look at him. Sarah gently pulled him back to his seat. "Sorry about my son," she murmured, while Some muffled laughter echoed through the cabin. Tyler looked back out the window, but the joy had disappeared from his eyes. Now there was only concern and a growing certainty that something was wrong. The vibration gradually increased and the sound became more defined. "Please, Mom," he whispered. "Something's wrong. I know it." At that instant, a deafening boom shook the aircraft. Screams filled the cabin as the plane rapidly lost altitude. Through the window glass, Tyler saw metal fragments flying from the left engine, which was now enveloped in black smoke. A larger piece tore through part of the fuselage with a terrifying metallic noise. "Ladies and gentlemen," the co-pilot's trembling voice sounded over the speakers, "we've had a failure in the left engine. Please remain calm and put on the oxygen. Masks that will automatically drop." The masks dropped and chaos ensued. Sarah grabbed her son's hand tightly, while silent tears ran down her face. She had worked so hard, sacrificed so much for this moment that should have been one of happiness. "It's going to be okay, Mom," said Tyler, with a serenity that contrasted with the panic around them. Planes are designed to fly with just one engine. But he knew the problem was bigger. From the sound and the way the aircraft was reacting, the main controls had been damaged. What no one else realized was that they weren't just losing altitude, they were losing control of the aircraft. The captain's voice returned, this time more serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an emergency in the cockpit. The pilots are incapacitated. Is there anyone on board with aviation experience?" A heavy silence followed the announcement, broken only by sobs and whispered prayers. Tyler looked at his mother, who was squeezing a small crucifix between her fingers. "Son," she began, recognizing the determined look she saw every day when he spent hours studying aviation instead of playing like other children. Tyler took a deep breath. For years, his passion had been just a distant dream, something that distanced him from harsh reality. Now, in this critical moment, it might be the only hope they had. Slowly, he raised his hand. The flight attendant spotted the small raised hand and frowned. She approached with uncertain steps, while the plane continued in a controlled descent. I know about planes," said Tyler, his voice almost inaudible amid the general panic. "I've studied a lot about this." The flight attendant looked at Sarah for confirmation, as if this was some kind of bad joke. The mother's anguished expression, however, showed that there was nothing funny about the situation. "He's just a child," interfered Richard Mitchell, the businessman who minutes before had reprimanded the boy. "This is crazy. There must be someone more qualified on board." "He knows aviation better than anyone," defended Sarah, with a strength that surprised even herself. "Please give my son a chance." The aircraft shook violently, tilting to the left. More screams echoed through the cabin. The flight attendant, a young woman named Rachel, grabbed onto the nearest seat to maintain her balance. "We don't have time for discussion," said Rachel, making a decision that could cost her job or save lives. "Come with me, kid." Tyler stood up, feeling the weight of stairs upon him. Sarah made a move to follow him, but the flight attendant shook her head. "Ma'am, I need you to stay here. Please, keep the other passengers calm." Tyler gave one last look at his mother, who whispered, "Go with God, my son." The corridor seemed endless as they advanced toward the cockpit. The plane continued losing altitude, and each jolt made Tyler fear they wouldn't arrive in time. As they passed through first class, Richard Mitchell abruptly stood up, blocking the path. "This is absurd," he declared, with the authority of someone who is used to being obeyed. "We're putting our lives in the hands of a kid from the projects." The word hit Tyler like a slap. They didn't live in the projects, just in a simple neighborhood on the outskirts. But in that man's eyes, any person without resources was the same, invisible and incompetent. "Mr. Mitchell," intervened a firm female voice, "please return to your seat." A middle-aged woman with Native American features and gray hair tied in a bun rose from her seat. Tyler recognized her immediately. Dr. Emily Parker, professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Illinois, whose article on turbines he had read in a discarded scientific magazine. "Professor Parker," murmured Tyler, incredulous. The woman looked at the boy with surprise. "You know me?" "I read your article on turbine compressor failures," Tyler quickly replied. You calculated the probabilities of control recovery in different failure scenarios. Emily Parker's eyes widened, impressed by the precision of the reference. She turned to Rachel with determination. I'm an aerospace engineer. I'll go with you. Richard Mitchell stammered something but backed down at the professor's firm gaze. The trio quickly headed for the cockpit. The door was partially damaged by debris. When they finally managed to open it, they encountered an alarming scene. The captain was unconscious with a head injury, while the co-pilot struggled to maintain control with a visibly injured arm. "Thank God!" exclaimed the co-pilot Chris upon seeing them. His pale face showed signs of extreme pain. "I can't anymore. The main panel was damaged and the hydraulic controls are compromised." Emily quickly advanced, examining the panel with expert eyes. Tyler remained a few steps behind, analyzing each instrument, each warning light. "We need to stabilize the aircraft first," said Emily, taking the captain's seat. "Can you help me, Chris?" The co-pilot nodded, but when he tried to move his injured arm, he let out a groan of pain. "I think it's broken." "I can help," offered Tyler, stepping forward. Emily hesitated for a moment, looking at the skinny boy in simple clothes. There was no time for doubts. "Do you know the basic instruments?" she asked, while trying to stabilize the altitude. "Yes. Ma'am, I can read all the instruments and I understand the emergency protocols for the Boeing 737-800. The precision of the response surprised everyone in the cockpit. Tyler wasn't bluffing. He spoke with the confidence of someone who really knew the subject. "Sit in the co-pilot's position," ordered Emily. "Chris, can you instruct him on the specific procedures for this aircraft?" In the following minutes, while Rachel cared for the injured captain, Chris guided Tyler on the particularities of the controls. The boy absorbed each piece of information with impressive capacity, asking precise and technical questions. "The secondary hydraulic system has been compromised," observed Tyler, pointing to a flashing indicator. "We need to manually activate the tertiary system." Chris exchanged a surprised look with Emily. The boy was right. "The activation lever is in the lower compartment," explained Chris. "But with my arm like this, I'll ask someone from the crew to do it," said Rachel, preparing to leave. "Wait," interrupted Tyler. "My mum can do it. She has small hands and is very strong." Rachel hesitated, but Emily nodded. "Bring her here." Minutes later, Sarah was in the cockpit, listening attentively to her son's instructions. Her eyes revealed fear, but also an unwavering confidence in Tyler. "It's like the water valve you always fix at home, Mum," explained Tyler, holding her trembling hands. "Except this one controls the movement of the wings." Sarah took a deep breath, finding courage in her son's gaze. "Show me the way." While Rachel guided Sarah to the lower compartment, Tyler turned his attention back to the control panel. With Emily beside him, they began working on stabilizing the aircraft. "The right engine is overloaded," observed Tyler. "We need to reduce power to avoid overheating." "Correct," confirmed Emily, impressed with the precise analysis. "How do you know so much about planes?" Tyler adjusted some controls before answering. "When you don't have much in life, you cling to what makes you happy. For me, it's always been planes." A strong jolt interrupted the conversation. Outside, dark clouds were accumulating, and the first lightning bolts tore through the sky. "Electrical storm approaching," warned Chris, who was now monitoring the weather radar with his good hand. "And we don't have enough altitude to avoid. How long until we get full hydraulic control?" asked Emily. "Depends on my mom being able to activate the system," replied Tyler, trying to stay calm. In the lower compartment, Sarah was facing her own challenge. The space was tight, poorly lit, and the constant jolts made it difficult to maintain balance. Following Rachel's instructions, she located the emergency lever. "It's very stiff," grunted Sarah, applying all her strength. "Try again," encouraged Rachel. "Lives depend on it." Sarah closed her eyes for an instant, visualizing her son's face. That boy who had been drawing planes on the apartment walls since he was little, who saved every penny from his birthday to buy aviation magazines, who spent hours in the library studying instead of playing like other children. Her son, who was now in the cockpit fighting to save everyone. With a determined cry, Sarah pulled the lever with all the strength she possessed. There was a metallic click, and the tertiary hydraulic system was activated. In the cockpit, the indicators showed the immediate change. "She did it!" exclaimed Tyler with tears in his eyes. "We have rudder control again." "Great work," praised Emily. "Now we need to find a place for an emergency landing. The nearest airport is 105 miles away." "We won't make it there," Tyler quickly calculated. "With this fuel consumption and the engine condition, we have range for a maximum of 75 miles. Chris checked the aeronautical charts. "There's a private property with a landing strip about 56 miles from here." Tyler examined the coordinates and felt a shiver run down his spine. "This runway belongs to Mitchell Hotels Group?" Chris nodded. "Yes, it's Richard Mitchell's private property." A deafening thunder shook the aircraft, making the lights flicker. At the same time, Sarah and Rachel returned to the cockpit, exhausted but triumphant. "We did it," announced Sarah, running to hug her son. Tyler quickly returned the hug, but his eyes remained fixed on the instruments. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. The only chance of survival was in the hands of the boy whom Richard Mitchell had humiliated, and salvation depended on a runway belonging to the same man. "Can you make contact with the tower, Chris?" asked Emily. "I'm trying, but the storm is interfering with communications." Tyler looked out the cockpit window. The lightning illuminated the dark sky, creating a threatening scenario. On the panel, the right engine temperature indicator continued to rise dangerously. "We have no choice," he declared, with a maturity that impressed everyone. "We're heading for Mr. Mitchell's runway." As the aircraft altered its route, facing increasingly strong turbulence, Tyler knew that the real challenge was just beginning. By a strange coincidence of fate, his life had become intertwined with that of the man who had despised him. And now everyone's survival depended on this unlikely connection. "We need to inform the passengers," said Emily, while Tyler and Sarah worked together on the secondary controls. The boy moved his hands with the precision of a surgeon, surprising even the engineering professor. "Rachel, you can make the announcement," suggested Chris, still monitoring communications. "Explain the situation without causing more panic." The ID flight attendant nodded, picking up the interphone with trembling hands. Outside the cockpit, the passengers waited in tense silence, interrupted only by the muffled crying of some and the whispered prayers of others. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rachel began, her voice firmer than she expected, "we are facing a technical emergency, but the situation is under control. We have an aerospace engineer assisting in the cockpit and we're heading for an emergency landing." She paused, carefully considering her next words. "We are being assisted by a young passenger with technical knowledge in aviation. I ask that you remain calm and follow all crew instructions." A murmur ran through the cabin. Richard Mitchell, who had remained silent since the confrontation, raised his head in disbelief. "A kid is flying the plane?" he asked loudly, causing a new wave of anxiety among the passengers. An elderly lady sitting near him turned with a severe expression. "The same kid you humiliated when he tried to warn about the problem in the engine." The businessman didn't respond, but his look revealed a mixture of shame and incredulity. In the cockpit, Tyler was mentally tracing the route to the private runway. The storm complicated everything, forming an almost impenetrable barrier of heavy clouds and turbulence. "If we follow the standard flight plan, we'll have to go through the center of the storm," he explained, pointing to the radar. "But if we divert through the St. Johns River Valley, we can bypass the worst part." Emily examined the suggestion carefully. "It's risky to fly so low with limited control, but you're right. It's our best option." "Did you make contact with the tower?" Sarah asked Chris, while firmly holding an auxiliary lever that helped maintain the aircraft's stability. "I'm picking up something." "Wait." Chris adjusted the radio, and a broken voice emerged amidst the static. "Emergency, repeat, conditions." Tyler leaned over the communication panel. "We can amplify the signal if we recalibrate the frequency." Without waiting for confirmation, he delicately adjusted the radio controls, using knowledge he had acquired by watching technical videos on the internet. The static decreased, and the voice became clearer. Aircraft in emergency. This is Miami. Control tower. What is your current situation? Chris handed the microphone to Emily, who responded with technical precision. Miami Tower, this is flight GL4217. We had a catastrophic failure of the left engine with damage to the primary hydraulic systems. We are operating on a tertiary system with limited control. We request authorization for emergency landing at coordinates. She looked at Tyler, who quickly provided the exact numbers of the location of Mitchell's runway. The tower's response came immediately. GL4217, understood. We are contacting local authorities and emergency services for the indicated location. Keep us informed of your situation. Who is in command of the aircraft? Emily hesitated for a moment, looking at Tyler. The boy kept his eyes fixed on the instruments, mentally calculating the necessary corrections to compensate for the wind gusts that shook the plane. The aircraft is being piloted by me, Dr. Emily Parker, aerospace engineer with assistance from, she paused, a technical specialist. The response seemed to satisfy the tower for now. Chris turned off the microphone and looked at the group with a more confident expression. At least we're not alone now. A lightning bolt struck dangerously close to the aircraft, making the lights flicker again. Sarah instinctively squeezed her son's hand. We're entering the turbulence area, warned Tyler. Mom, I need you to go back to your seat and help Rachel prepare the passengers for an emergency landing. Sarah hesitated, torn between the maternal instinct to protect her son and the need to help others. Everything's going to be fine, Tyler assured, with a fragile smile. I promise. With tears in her eyes, Sarah quickly hugged her son before following Rachel out of the cockpit. As she passed through the door, she turned one last time. I'm so proud of you, my son. When the door closed, Tyler allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the aircraft's course. Are you afraid? Emily gently asked. Yes, he admitted, but I'm also focused. That's how real pilots feel, said Chris, offering an encouraging smile. Fear keeps us alert. Focus keeps us alive. Tyler nodded, grateful for the support. Outside, the storm intensified, transforming the sky into an electrical battlefield. We're approaching the valley, he informed, carefully reducing altitude. If we fly low enough, we can use the mountains as protection against crosswinds. That's, Emily hesitated, impressed, exactly what I would do. Where did you learn this technique? Documentary about emergency landing in the Rockies, replied Tyler, without taking his eyes off the horizon. I watched it 16 times. In the passenger cabin, Sarah and Rachel moved quickly, checking seatbelts and explaining the brace position for impact. The boy who's helping, began a nervous passenger. He's your son, isn't he? The same one. Who tried to warn about the engine? Sarah nodded, continuing her work. Does he seem to know what he's doing? The question contained a desperate plea for safety, for hope. Sarah stopped and looked directly into the woman's eyes. My son has spent every free minute of the last 5 years studying aviation. He knows every button, every procedure, every possible maneuver. If there's anyone who can bring us safely to the ground, it's Tyler. Her words, spoken with absolute conviction, echoed through the cabin. Even Richard Mitchell, sitting rigidly in his first-class seat, seemed affected. The runway we're heading to, he said suddenly. There's my property, isn't it? Rachel confirmed with a nod. I want to talk to the boy, declared Mitchell, unfastening his seatbelt. Impossible, sir, Rachel replied firmly. The cockpit is isolated during the emergency procedure. It's my runway. I have critical information about local conditions. Sarah intervened, placing herself between Mitchell and the corridor that led to the cockpit. If you have important information, you can tell me. I'm his mother. The businessman hesitated, evaluating the simple woman in front of him. There was dignity in her posture, despite her modest clothes and calloused hands. The runway is 5,000 feet, but only the first 4,000 are in ideal conditions, he explained, lowering his voice. There have been heavy rains in the region in recent days. The terrain may be unstable at the extremities. Sarah memorized every word determined to transmit the information as soon as possible. In the cockpit, Tyler was carefully guiding the plane through the valley while the storm raged around them. The lightning momentarily illuminated the terrain below, revealing the river winding between rocky formations. "Right engine at critical. Temperature," warned Chris, pointing to the indicator that was now flashing red. "How long until the runway?" asked Emily, mentally calculating their options. 17 minutes maintaining this speed and altitude," replied Tyler, "but I don't know if the engine will hold that long." A new alert sounded on the panel. The navigation system was beginning to fail, affected by the electrical interference from the storm. "We're losing GPS," announced Chris, trying to restart the system without success. Tyler took a deep breath. "I can navigate visually if we can descend below the clouds." "That would put the aircraft dangerously close to the terrain," warned Emily. "Do we have a choice?" Tyler's question hung in the air for a few seconds. At that moment, the cockpit door opened and Sarah entered hurriedly. "Mr. Mitchell sent information about the runway," she said, reporting in detail what she had learned. Tyler quickly assimilated the information. "This complicates things. We need to reduce the approach speed, but with the engine overheating." "We can use the St. Johns River as a visual reference," suggested Emily, pointing to the map. "It passes less than 1.5 miles from the property. And what if we use the ground effect to gain additional lift?" proposed Tyler, his eyes shining with an idea. "If we fly close to the river's surface, we can reduce engine power and still maintain sufficient altitude." Chris and Emily exchanged impressed looks. It was a risky maneuver, usually taught only in advanced piloting courses. "It could work," Emily finally agreed, "but the margin of error is minimal." "It's our best chance," insisted Tyler. "Trust me." Sarah observed her son with a mixture of fear and admiration. That boy who collected airplane miniatures made from scrap was now performing complex calculations and proposing maneuvers that impressed even experts. "What can I do to help?" she asked, determined to remain useful. "Go back to the cabin and make sure everyone is prepared for a rough landing," instructed Emily. "And," she hesitated, exchanging a look with Tyler, "tell Mr. Mitchell we'll need his help when we land. He knows the terrain better than anyone." Sarah nodded, hugged her son once more and left the cockpit. Tyler turned his attention back to the controls, carefully adjusting the aircraft's trajectory. "We're going to descend below the clouds now," he announced, gradually reducing altitude. Aziskayam. The plane emerged from the base of the stormy clouds. A green and undulating landscape revealed itself below. The St. Johns River, swollen by recent rains, wound like a silver ribbon between hills covered with vegetation. "There," Tyler pointed, identifying the course of the river. "We'll follow it until we sight the property." With steady hands, he guided the aircraft closer to the water's surface, feeling the resistance change as the ground effect began to act, creating a cushion of pressurized air between the wings and the water. "Amazing," murmured Chris, observing how the aircraft stabilized, even with the engine in critical condition. "It worked," exclaimed Emily, checking the instruments. "The pressure on the engine is reducing." Tyler allowed himself a small smile. For a brief moment, he felt connected to all those pilots he had studied and admired. He was really flying, applying knowledge that many believed impossible for someone of his age and social condition. "I see the property," announced Chris, pointing to a clearing ahead, where a private landing strip cut through the vegetation like a straight scar on the undulating terrain. "Prepare for final approach," directed Tyler, slightly raising the nose of the aircraft. "Miami Tower, this is flight GL4217. We are beginning final approach for emergency landing at the informed coordinates." The response came broken by static. "GL4217, understood. Emergency services on the way. ETA 20 minutes. "We won't have 20 minutes, murmured Emily, observing the engine that now emitted a high-pitched and irregular sound. Tyler knew they were about to face the most critical moment of the entire operation. The landing would be extremely risky, with compromised systems and partially unstable terrain. But upon sighting the runway, he felt a strange calm. Everything he had studied, everything he had dreamed of, converged on this moment. It wasn't Just his life and his mother's at stake. It was all those people who minutes before doubted his ability. "Prepare for emergency landing," he announced, with a surprisingly mature voice. "We're going home." The final approach seemed promising, with the plane maintaining a stable trajectory despite the adverse conditions. Tyler felt the weight of responsibility in each adjustment of the controls, in each decision made. 5 kilometers. "To the runway," informed Chris, monitoring the distance. "Correct altitude for the approach." That's when it happened. A deafening boom shook the aircraft, followed by a blinding flash that illuminated the entire cockpit. Lightning had directly hit the aircraft's electrical system. "We've lost power," shouted Emily, as the panel lights flickered frantically before going out completely. For a few terrifying seconds, the cockpit plunged into total darkness. Tyler felt control slipping through his fingers as the plane began to rapidly lose lift. "Emergency system," he ordered, maintaining calm despite his racing heart. "Manual activation." Chris, using his only good hand, pulled an emergency lever under the panel. The lights came back, weak and flickering, powered by the auxiliary battery, but the damage was done. The remaining engine had completely stopped. "We've lost the engine," announced Emily with a grave voice. "We're gliding now." Tyler faced reality with a knot in his stomach. A commercial airplane was not designed to glide efficiently. Without power, their chances of reaching the runway diminished drastically with each second. "We're losing altitude too quickly," warned Chris. "The descent rate is at 500 feet per minute and increasing." Tyler felt a wave of despair threatening to dominate him. All his theoretical knowledge seemed insufficient in the face of this new challenge. For the first time since taking the controls, doubt infiltrated his mind. Maybe he wasn't capable after all. Maybe he was just a poor kid with dreams too big. "Tyler," Emily's voice cut through his dark thoughts. "We need a solution now." He looked at the partially functional panel, at the horizon darkened by the storm, at the runway that seemed increasingly unreachable. For an instant, he felt the crushing weight of all the lives on board, including his mother's. "I don't know if I can do it," he murmured, his child's voice finally showing through the facade of technical competence. Emily placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Breathe deeply, think. You know this plane better than you imagine." Tyler closed his eyes for a second, seeking clarity. He remembered the nights spent studying emergency manuals, the free flight simulators where he practiced extreme situations, the stories of miraculous landings he collected in his worn notebook. "The flap," he said suddenly, opening his eyes. "We can extend the flap to maximum to increase lift and reduce stall speed. The hydraulic system is still operational through the emergency reservoir," confirmed Chris, checking the indicators. "But that will only give us a few extra seconds." "We can use the thermal updrafts from the storm," continued Tyler, his mind working quickly. "If we pass by the side of that cumulus formation, the current can give us the elevation we need to reach the runway." It was an extremely risky maneuver, the kind of thing experienced pilots would hesitate to try even in ideal conditions. Chris and Emily exchanged concerned looks. "We don't have a choice," Emily finally decided. "Let's try." Tyler adjusted the course, directing the aircraft toward the edge of the cloud formation he had identified. His hands trembled slightly, but his movements remained precise. "Hold on," he warned. "The turbulence will be intense." The next instant, the plane was captured by the updraft, shaking violently as it was pushed upward by the column of hot air. The passengers screamed when the aircraft seemed to jump in the air like a toy. "It's working!" exclaimed Chris, observing the altimeter that showed a brief recovery of altitude. The relief, however, was short-lived. A metallic boom reverberated through the fuselage, followed by a high-pitched tearing sound. "What was that?" asked Emily, alarmed. "The pressure on the damaged structure?" Tyler didn't need to complete the sentence. On the panel, a new warning light lit up. The structural integrity of the fuselage was compromised. "We're losing cabin pressure," warned Chris, "and there's a growing rupture near the damaged engine section." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The momentary gain in altitude had been accompanied by a new and serious structural problem. Tyler felt the control of the aircraft becoming more difficult with each second. as if the plane were disintegrating in his hands. In the passenger cabin, Sarah noticed the change in the aircraft's attitude. The floor trembled under her feet, and a sinister metallic sound propagated through the walls. Automatically, her gaze turned to the cockpit door, imagining her son fighting to keep everyone alive. "What's happening?" asked Richard Mitchell, his previous arrogance replaced by genuine fear. "Trust my son," replied Sarah, with more confidence than she felt. "He will find a way." Back in the cockpit, Tyler faced the most difficult decision yet. The thermal current had given them some altitude, but the structural damage meant they couldn't risk another similar maneuver. The runway was visible now, but still seemed impossibly distant. "We won't be able to reach the runway," he admitted, with a choked voice. "We need to look for an alternative landing site." Chris examined the terrain below through the side window. "I only see dense vegetation and hills. There's not enough flat area." "What about that?" Tyler pointed to a narrow strip that wound parallel to the river. "Okay, it looks like a dirt road." Emily adjusted the emergency binoculars. "It's a service road for the farm, extremely narrow and with trees on both sides." "What's the width?" asked Tyler. "Impossible to be precise, but certainly less than half." The wingspan of the plane. A heavy silence filled the cockpit as the reality of the situation became clear. There were no safe options. Any landing attempt would result in catastrophic damage to the aircraft. "I have to try for the original runway," Tyler finally decided. "Even if we can't reach it completely, we can use the terrain before it for an emergency landing." "It's marshy due to recent rains," warned Chris. "It may not support the weight of the aircraft." "It's our only chance," insisted Tyler. At this critical moment, the cockpit door opened. Again. It was Rachel, the flight attendant, her face pale with worry. "The fuselage is rupturing in the rear compartment," she informed. "The passengers are in panic." Tyler felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. It wasn't just the aircraft. That was falling apart. It was also his confidence, his certainty that he could save everyone. "Tell them to assume the brace position," ordered Emily. "We're attempting an emergency landing." When Rachel left, Tyler turned to the two adults who accompanied him in the cockpit. His eyes, previously determined, now revealed the fear of a 12-year-old boy facing an impossible responsibility. "What if I can't do it?" he whispered. "What if everyone dies because of me?" "No one will die because of you," Emily replied firmly. "You've already done more than anyone could expect. Without you, we would have crashed long ago." Chris nodded in agreement. "You gave us a chance, kid. Now let's take that chance together." Their words comforted Tyler but didn't eliminate the corrosive doubt. He looked at the panel, where the indicators showed an increasingly desperate situation. Decreasing altitude, compromised structural integrity, intermittently failing electrical systems. A particularly violent tremor shook the aircraft, causing Tyler to almost lose control of the yoke. The auxiliary battery light began to flash, indicating that it too was about to fail. "We're losing the last systems," warned Chris. "Soon we'll be without instruments." Tyler felt hot tears forming in his eyes. He thought of his mother, of all, the sacrifices she had made to provide him with this trip. He thought of the worn-out books on aviation he collected, of the hours spent dreaming of this moment. The cruel irony didn't escape him. His first flight could also be his last. "I can't do this," he murmured, as the aircraft lost altitude ever more rapidly. "I don't know enough, I'm just a kid." Emily firmly held his arm, forcing him to face her. "Listen to me, Tyler. I know trained engineers who wouldn't understand half of what you know about this aircraft. You're not just anything. You're exactly who should be here at this moment." A new alert sounded on the panel, a strident sound indicating dangerous proximity to the ground. The terrain was approaching rapidly, a mixture of vegetation, earth, and water that promised a devastating impact. 30 seconds to impact, announced Chris, his voice strangely calm. "It's now or never, Tyler." Tyler looked through the cockpit. Windshield. Mitchell's runway was a faint line on the horizon, impossible to reach. Closer, the irregular terrain of the farm extended like a green and brown carpet. There was no perfect choice, only impossible decisions. Let's try that clearer area, he decided, pointing to a less wooded section. It seems firmer than the rest. With the last forces of the hydraulic system, Tyler positioned the plane for the final approach. His fingers moved automatically, adjusting flaps, angle of attack, trying to extract each additional second of gliding. Flight! 10 seconds, counted Chris. Tyler closed his eyes for an instant, visualizing his mother. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I tried." When he opened his eyes again, there was a new determination in his gaze. If this was the end, it wouldn't be for lack of effort. He grabbed the yoke firmly and prepared for the inevitable impact. "Brace position," shouted Emily, as the Earth approached at an alarming speed. The world seemed to slow down for Tyler in those last seconds. Each movement, each decision, seemed to happen in slow motion. With a precision born of desperation, he executed the final maneuver, the last chance, to transform an imminent disaster into a tenuous possibility of survival. Now, the impact was violent, but less catastrophic than Tyler had feared. The fuselage trembled and groaned under the pressure as the aircraft slid through the low vegetation, uprooting bushes and raising a cloud of earth and water. The nose of the plane partially sank into the waterlogged ground, abruptly decelerating the movement. "Hold on!" shouted Tyler, fighting to maintain some control during the chaotic slide. The plane spun slightly to the left, the damaged wing dragging along the ground like an irregular anchor. Young trees broke upon contact with the metal structure, each impact reverberating through the cabin like a gunshot. Inside the aircraft, passengers screamed, objects flew, and the sound of twisting metal created a terrifying symphony. When they finally stopped, a surreal silence took over the cockpit. Tyler, stunned by the impact, tried to assess the situation. A sharp pain in his shoulder indicated that he had been injured, but he could move. Beside him, Emily was unfastening her seatbelt with trembling hands. "Chris," she called, turning to the co-pilot. The man was conscious, but his face had drastically paled. "I think I broke something else," he murmured, trying to smile despite the evident pain. "We made it," whispered Tyler, almost incredulous. "We landed." "You made it," corrected Emily, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. It was extraordinary. Reality, however, soon imposed itself. An acrid smell of fuel began to fill the cockpit, and Tyler realized they were far from safe. "We need to evacuate," he declared, standing up with difficulty. "The tanks may be compromised." At that moment, the cockpit door opened violently. Rachel appeared with a cut on her forehead, but functionally intact. "Everyone's alive," she reported, her voice trembling with relief and adrenaline. "Some injuries, but nothing fatal from what I could quickly check." "My mom?" asked Tyler, his heart racing. "She's helping the others. She's amazing." A new tremor shook the aircraft, followed by a threatening metallic sound. The already compromised structure was giving way even more. "We have to get out now," ordered Emily. "Do the emergency exits still work?" "The rear is blocked, but the exits over the wings and the front door are operational," replied Rachel. "Let's evacuate the injured first," decided Tyler, again taking the lead despite the growing fear. "Then women, children, and the elderly, the most capable last." Rachel nodded and quickly returned to the passenger cabin. Tyler made a move to follow her, but Emily stopped him. "The electrical system is still active," she warned. "With the fuel leak, it could cause a fire at any moment." "I need to deactivate it manually," concluded Tyler, immediately understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll do it," offered Chris. "You need to help with the evacuation." "Your arm is broken," argued Tyler. "I can shut down the systems." More quickly. Before Chris could protest, Tyler was already bent under the main panel, locating the emergency fuse box. With precise movements, he began to methodically deactivate each system, prioritizing those that could generate sparks. In the passenger cabin, the controlled chaos of evacuation was underway. Sarah coordinated passengers at one end, while Rachel worked at the other. To everyone's surprise, Richard Mitchell had taken an active role, helping elderly people exit through the emergency exits. "This way," he directed, guiding a trembling elderly lady to the door. "Careful with the drop." Sarah sought her son with her gaze while working. When she spotted him coming out of the cockpit, her eyes filled with tears of relief. Tyler looked different, older somehow, as if hours had transformed into years. "Tyler," she called, trying to reach him among the passengers. He saw her, and for an instant he was just a 12-year-old boy again, desperate for his mother's embrace. But the smell of fuel was getting stronger, and a new responsibility imposed itself. "Mom, continue helping with the evacuation," he shouted. "I need to check the fuel tank." "No," protested Sarah, pushing people to reach her son. "It's too dangerous." At that moment, a new tremor, more violent than the previous ones, shook the aircraft. The floor tilted dangerously, and a sound of tearing metal echoed through the cabin. Renewed screams of panic arose as the passengers still on board struggled to maintain balance. "We're sinking into the ground," warned Rachel. "The soil is giving way." It was true. The weight of the plane was causing the structure to sink into the terrain waterlogged by recent rains. The left wing, already damaged by the engine explosion, began to give way under the pressure, threatening to completely rupture the fuel tank. "We all need to get out now," ordered Emily, emerging from the cockpit supporting Chris. The sudden movement of panicked passengers made the aircraft tilt even more, making evacuation more difficult. Tyler realized they needed to balance the weight somehow, or the structure could collapse before everyone managed to exit. "We'll need counterweight." "On the other side," he shouted, pointing to the right wing. "Some passengers need to move there while others exit from the left side." Sarah looked at her son with a mixture of pride and terror. Her boy was thinking like an experienced engineer amid the chaos. She began directing some passengers to the right side, following Tyler's instructions. It was at this critical moment that Richard Mitchell appeared beside Tyler, his expensive suit now torn and dirty. "Kid," he said with a seriousness never before demonstrated, "I have a tractor on the property, about 1,000 feet from here. It can help stabilize the aircraft." Tyler looked at the businessman, surprised by the offer. "Can you get there and back in time?" "I'm the only one who knows exactly where it is," replied Mitchell. "I can go by the side trail. It's faster than going around the marshy terrain." Without waiting for a response, Mitchell headed for the nearest exit. Before going down, he turned to Tyler. "You were right about the engine. I was wrong. I won't forget that." While Mitchell disappeared into the vegetation, Tyler turned his attention to the most urgent problem. The plane continued to sink, now at an even more dangerous angle. Most of the passengers had already exited, but there were still about 20 people on board, including some injured who had difficulty moving. "We need more time," murmured Tyler, frantically examining the aircraft structure. That's when he noticed something, a tenuous possibility. "Mom," he called, "I need you and 2 more strong adults to come with me to the forward baggage compartment." Sarah didn't question, simply followed her son. A flight attendant and a robust passenger joined them. "What are we going to do?" asked the flight attendant, as Tyler opened access to the compartment. "Redistribute weight," he explained quickly. "If we move the heaviest baggage to the right side, we can temporarily balance the aircraft until everyone is evacuated." The 4 began to work quickly, dragging luggage and equipment to the opposite side of the tilt. It was an arduous and desperate effort, but gradually the tilt of the aircraft seemed to stabilize a bit. "It's working," exclaimed Sarah as she pushed a last heavy suitcase. At that moment, a distinct sound reached Tyler's ears, the roar of a powerful engine approaching. Through the window, he saw Richard Mitchell driving a large agricultural tractor toward the aircraft. He made it. Hope renewed in the boy's face. Mitchell strategically positioned the tractor under the right wing, using the front bucket to create an improvised support. The aircraft's balance immediately improved, facilitating the evacuation of the last passengers. "This will give us a few minutes," explained Mitchell, jumping from the tractor and climbing back on board. "But the terrain continues to give way. We need to be quick." Together, Tyler, Sarah, Mitchell, and the remaining crew worked to evacuate the last injured. Chris was the second to last to leave, insisting on staying until almost everyone was safe. "It's just us now," said Emily, positioned at the exit door. "Let's go, Tyler." The boy gestured for her to go first, but stopped when he noticed something alarming. A sound of increasingly accelerated dripping was coming from the damaged fuel tank. "The tank is rupturing," he warned, panic finally showing in his voice. "We have seconds, not minutes." "Get out now," ordered Mitchell, pushing him toward the exit. Tyler hesitated for a fraction of a second, then grabbed the businessman's arm and pulled him along. The two jumped from the aircraft at the exact moment. A dull boom indicated that the internal structure had finally given way. The impact of the fall caused Tyler to hit his head on the muddy ground. His vision darkened momentarily, and a buzzing took over his ears. He felt strong arms lifting him, dragging him away from the aircraft. Through blurred vision, he recognized Richard Mitchell carrying him with determination. "Mom," murmured Tyler, struggling to maintain consciousness. "She's safe," assured Mitchell without stopping moving. "Everyone is safe thanks to you." The last thing Tyler saw before completely losing consciousness was the sky beginning to clear, the storm finally moving away. A strange and distant thought crossed his mind at that moment. Something about the statistical probabilities of survival in aircraft accidents that he had studied years ago. He had never imagined that one day he would be part of those statistics. When he woke up, he was lying in an unfamiliar bed. The environment around him was luxurious, walls of fine wood, elegant furniture, a large window that revealed a sky now without clouds. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. "Tyler." His mother's voice brought him back to reality. Sarah was sitting beside the bed, her eyes red from crying so much, but her face illuminated by a smile of relief. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice hoarse and weak. "In Mr. Mitchell's country house," replied Sarah, holding his hand tightly. "He brought you unconscious. A doctor has already examined you." "The other passengers?" "Everyone survived. Some injuries, but nothing serious. The emergency services arrived shortly after you lost consciousness." Tyler tried to sit up, but dizziness forced him to retreat against the pillows. "Easy, son. The doctor said you need to rest. You're dehydrated and had a mild concussion." The door opened silently, and Richard Mitchell entered the room. He seemed like a completely different person from the arrogant businessman on the plane. His face showed genuine concern. "How is he?" he asked Sarah. "He just woke up. He's confused, but fine." Mitchell approached the bed, looking at Tyler, with an expression the boy couldn't decipher. "You saved many lives today, including mine," he said simply. "Thank you doesn't seem enough." Tyler didn't know how to respond. Everything that had happened seemed unreal, like one of the flight simulators he used to practice on. "While you were unconscious," continued Mitchell, "I received an interesting call from the hospital where the captain and co-pilot are being treated." Sarah and Tyler looked at him confused. "Chris told how you identified the problem in the engine, even before the instruments detected the failure, how you recognized patterns that not even experienced pilots would notice so quickly." Mitchell paused, seeming to carefully choose his next words. "He asked me if I knew that you have a rare neurological condition, something that allows your brain to process visual and auditory patterns in an extraordinary way." Tyler frowned. "I don't have any condition. I just really like planes." Sarah gently touched her son's arm. "The doctor who examined you noticed something different in the way your eyes track movements. He asked some questions about your development." "What questions?" Tyler felt confused and slightly alarmed. "If you've always been fascinated by patterns, if you can easily memorize long sequences, if you perceive sounds that other people don't perceive." Sarah paused. "Things I've always noticed in you, but never had the means to properly investigate." Richard Mitchell looked at the skinny boy, in simple clothes with a renewed expression of interest. "The doctor believes you may have a form of synesthesia associated with advanced sensory processing, something extremely rare and valuable." "Valuable," repeated Tyler, not completely understanding. "Especially in aviation," explained Mitchell. "People with your ability can perceive failures before the sensors themselves detect them. They can process critical information in emergency situations with a clarity that others can't." Tyler looked at his mother, seeking confirmation. Sarah smiled through her tears. "I always knew you were special, son, I just didn't know exactly how." At that moment, something fundamentally changed for Tyler. What he had always considered just an obsessive interest, a passion fueled by hours of solitary study, could be part of something much bigger, a unique ability that made him especially adapted to the world he loved so much. "What does this mean?" he finally asked, his voice small in the face of the enormity of the revelation. Richard Mitchell smiled for the first time since they had met. "It means, Tyler, that perhaps your place in the sky isn't just a distant dream, maybe it's your destiny." The following days passed like a blur for Tyler. The news of the miraculous landing spread quickly through the national media. Prodigy, Boy Saves Plane, and Little Hero of the Skies were some of the headlines that dominated newspapers and news broadcasts. Reporters camped at the entrance to Richard Mitchell's property, eager for an interview with the boy who had achieved the impossible. Tyler, however, remained in the guest room, physically recovering and trying to process everything that had happened. The private doctor hired by Mitchell confirmed the initial suspicion. Tyler possessed a rare neurological condition that amplified his ability to perceive and process complex patterns, especially related to sounds and mechanical movements. "It's an extraordinary gift," explained the neurologist, Dr. Martinez, during a more in-depth consultation. "Your mind can detect anomalies in mechanical systems even before instruments register them." Sarah listened to everything with a mixture of fascination and maternal concern. This explains why he was always so different from other children. Tyler remained silent, contemplating what this revelation meant for him. On one hand, there was an explanation for his almost supernatural connection with aircraft. On the other, he felt exposed, as if an intimate secret had been revealed to the world without his permission. Richard Mitchell, transformed by the shared experience, showed himself surprisingly supportive. "You can stay here as long as you need," he offered to Sarah, while Tyler fully recovers. On the fourth day after the accident, Mitchell gently knocked on the door of the room where Tyler was resting. "May I come in?" he asked, with a gentleness that contrasted with his previous personality. Tyler nodded, sitting up in bed. He noticed that the businessman was carrying some documents and seemed unusually nervous. "How are you feeling?" "Better," replied Tyler simply. The truth was more complicated. Physically, he was almost recovered, but emotionally he felt lost, floating in an undefined space between the boy he was and the person everyone now expected him to be. "I have something to discuss with you and your mother," announced Mitchell, sitting in the armchair near the bed. "Something important." Sarah, who was arranging some clothes in a dresser, approached with a cautious expression. The last few weeks had taught her that offers of help often came with undeclared conditions. "What would it be?" she asked, positioning herself protectively next to her son. Mitchell took a deep breath before continuing. "I spoke with some contacts in the aviation sector. The news of what Tyler did caused a significant impact. Several entities have expressed interest in meeting him." "What kind of entities?" The mistrust was evident in Sarah's voice. "From airlines to aeronautical research institutes, the Air Force also made contact." Mitchell paused. "And I myself have done some deep reflection on what I witnessed." He extended an envelope to Sarah. "I would like to offer a complete scholarship for Tyler, private school, college in the future, and specialized training in aviation, if that's the path he wishes to follow." Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands, her eyes widening as she read the details of the proposal. It was more money than she would earn in decades of work. "Why?" asked Tyler, finally breaking his silence. "Why are you doing this?" Mitchell seemed momentarily disconcerted by the direct question. "Because you saved my life, because I was wrong about you, and because talents like yours are too rare to be wasted for lack of opportunities." Before Tyler could respond, Mitchell continued. "Besides, I've announced the creation of a foundation to identify and support young talents in underprivileged communities. You will be the first beneficiary, but not the last." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the implications of the offer. "It's very generous, but there are no hidden conditions," assured Mitchell, anticipating her concern. just the hope that Tyler can fully develop his potential. Tyler observed the scene with a growing feeling of discomfort. The future he had always dreamed of, studying aviation, perhaps one day becoming a pilot, was being offered on a silver platter. He should be ecstatic, but instead, he felt a crushing weight on his shoulders. "I need to think," he finally said. Mitchell nodded, understanding. "Oh, of course, there's no rush." He stood up to leave but stopped at the door. "Oh, I almost forgot, there are journalists requesting interviews, and the Air Force requested a formal meeting to discuss the details of the landing." When the door closed, Tyler faced his mother with anguished eyes. "What's happening, Mum?" Sarah sat beside her son, putting her arm around his thin shoulders. "Life is changing very rapidly, son, for both of us. I didn't ask for any of this." "I know, my love, I know." The next morning, at Mitchell's request, and with Sarah's reluctant agreement, Tyler agreed to participate in a single press conference held in the gardens of the property. Wearing new clothes provided by the businessman, he sat rigidly at an improvised table, flanked by his mother and Mitchell himself. "How does it feel to be called a national hero?" asked the first journalist. Tyler looked at the sea of faces and cameras pointed in his direction. The question seemed distant, disconnected from the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. "I'm not a hero," he responded simply. "I just did what I knew how to do." "Is it true that you have a special neurological condition?" questioned another reporter. "A kind of superpower to detect mechanical failures?" The question hit Tyler like a punch. How did they know about this? He looked accusingly at Mitchell, who seemed equally surprised by the indiscretion. "My son has the right to medical." "Privacy," intervened Sarah, firm despite her nervousness. "We won't comment on that." "Sources from the hospital claim that you were diagnosed with severe anemia," continued another journalist, relentless. "Result of years of malnutrition. Did your mother know about your health condition?" Sarah paled, and Tyler felt a growing fury. This was unfair, cruel. His mother had sacrificed everything for him, working multiple jobs, depriving herself of comforts so he could have the basics. "My mother is the best person I know," defended Tyler, his voice trembling with emotion. "I won't allow anyone to insinuate otherwise." Mitchell realized that the situation was getting out of control and abruptly ended the interview. As he led mother and son back to the house, he tried to calm them. "Ignore these provocations. The sensationalist press always seeks controversies." But the damage was done. In the following days, speculative reports began to emerge, questioning how a boy without formal training had managed to pilot a commercial aircraft. Some more sensationalist outlets insinuated that the whole story could be an elaborate fabrication. "They're doubting you," said Sarah, indignant, upon reading a particularly offensive headline. "How can they? There are more than 100 witnesses." Tyler remained increasingly quiet and introspective. The doubts that others raised began to echo in his own mind. Had he really saved the plane, or had he just been lucky? Was his special condition real, or just a coincidence being exaggerated? The last straw came a week after the accident. The National Civil Aviation Agency announced a formal investigation into the incident, and Tyler was summoned to testify and participate in controlled simulations to verify his abilities. "I won't go," he declared, when Mitchell brought the official notification. "Tyler, you need to," insisted the businessman. "It's part of the protocol for investigating aircraft accidents." "It wasn't an accident," corrected Tyler, irritated. "It was an emergency that we prevented from becoming an accident." "Even so, your participation is crucial for us to understand exactly what happened." Tyler looked out the window at the sky he loved so much. Now that same sky seemed to be closing around him, transforming his dream into a bureaucratic nightmare. "What if I fail the tests?" he finally asked, verbalizing his greatest fear. "What if they discover it was all luck?" Sarah, who had been observing the interaction in silence, approached her son. "Tyler, look at me." Reluctantly, the boy turned. "What you did on that plane wasn't luck. I was there. I saw how you acted, how you thought, how you found solutions that no one else saw. No test can take that away from you." But the words, although sincere, didn't penetrate the wall of doubts that Tyler had erected. On the morning of the test, he woke up vomiting, dominated by an anxiety that his young body could barely process. The Air Force Training Center was intimidating, a complex of modern buildings filled with advanced technology and uniformed people. Tyler walked through the corridors like an automaton, guided by courteous but distant officers. The simulation room was even more terrifying, a realistic cockpit of a Boeing 737-800 surrounded by screens and monitoring equipment. Through a glass, he could see an adjacent room where specialists and officers would observe him. "We're going to recreate the conditions of flight GL4217, explained the captain responsible for the tests. "We want to understand exactly how you perceived the engine failure and how you executed the emergency maneuvers." Tyler sat in the pilot's chair, his hands sweating. Everything seemed simultaneously familiar and alien. The controls were the same ones he had studied for years, but the context, the critical looks, the expectations, the pressure, was completely different. "Can we begin?" asked the simulator technician through the communication system. Tyler couldn't respond. His throat was closed, his chest compressed as if he were again in that vertiginous fall. But this time it wasn't the uncontrolled plane that terrified him. It was the fear of not being who everyone thought he was. "Tyler," the technician's voice sounded again. "Are you ready?" Tears began to silently run down his face. He couldn't do this. He couldn't relive that terrible moment. He couldn't face the possibility of failing, of being exposed as a fraud, of disappointing his mother, who had placed so much faith in him. "I can't," he whispered, so low that no one heard. In the observation room, specialists exchanged concerned looks. Sarah, who had insisted on accompanying her son, immediately perceived what was happening. "He's having a panic attack," she informed, anguished. "I need to go in there." "Ma'am, we can't interrupt the procedure," explained one of the officers. "It's not a procedure, it's my 12-year-old son," exclaimed Sarah, already heading for the door. In the simulator, Tyler felt himself sinking into a dark abyss. All the doubts, all the fears he had repressed during the real flight now engulfed him. He wasn't special. He wasn't a hero. He was just a poor kid with a dream too big. "Get me out of here," he begged, his voice almost inaudible. "Please." The simulator door opened and Sarah entered hurriedly, ignoring the technician's protests. Without saying a word, she hugged her son tightly. "Let's go home," she murmured in his ear. "I failed," sobbed Tyler against his mother's shoulder. "I couldn't even start the test." "You haven't failed at anything," Sarah replied firmly. "You've already proven everything you needed to prove on that plane." As they left the room, Tyler kept his head down, avoiding the specialist's gazes. He felt small, insignificant, an imposter about to be unmasked. All the bright future he had begun to glimpse, the studies, the opportunities, the chance to transform his passion into a profession, seemed to vanish before his eyes. "I want to leave," he said when they reached the corridor. "Home, our real home." Sarah nodded, understanding. Mitchell's scholarship, the promises of a better life, all of this suddenly seemed an unsustainable weight for her son. Perhaps it would be better to return to the simplicity of before, away from the spotlight and the crushing expectations. "Let's go then," she agreed, guiding him toward the exit. In the car that awaited them, Tyler looked one last time at the training center. There was his dream, so close and yet so distant, a dream that now haunted him instead of inspiring him. "I'm sorry, Mom," he murmured as the vehicle drove away. "I disappointed everyone." Sarah held his hand firmly. "You've never disappointed me, Tyler. Never." But the words, although sincere, didn't reach the dark place where the boy had taken refuge. In his mind, he had had one chance, a single precious chance, to transform his life and his mother's. And he had wasted it due to fear, insecurity, not believing in himself when everyone else seemed to believe. The sky, his eternal confidant, now seemed distant and indifferent. The planes he had loved so much, that he knew intimately in theory, now represented an impossible dream. At the most crucial moment he had frozen. What kind of pilot would do that? What kind of hero would surrender to fear? As the car traveled the streets back to the hotel where they were temporarily staying, Tyler made a silent decision. It was time to set dreams aside and face reality. He didn't belong in the sky. He never had. The hotel room seemed smaller than it really was, the walls coming a little closer with each passing hour. Tyler remained lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, while Sarah spoke on the phone in a low voice on the small balcony. 3 days had passed since the fiasco in the simulator, and the boy's silence grew like a wall between him and the world. "Yes, I understand the importance of the investigation," Sarah was saying, trying to maintain her composure. "But my son is still recovering emotionally. No, we can't reschedule for this week." Tyler closed his eyes, trying to block the conversation. He knew his mother was fighting battles on multiple fronts because of him, the NTSB insisting on the tests, journalists pursuing them for interviews, and now the school in Chicago questioning when they would return so he could complete a school semester. The door to the room opened silently, and Richard Mitchell entered after a brief knock. Tyler didn't move, pretending to be asleep. "How is he?" Mitchell asked in a low voice, heading to the balcony where Sarah was ending the call. "The same," she replied, exhausted. "Barely talks, barely eats. It's like he's given up. The doctors say it's a normal reaction to trauma and pressure, that we need to give time." Sarah ran her hand through her hair in frustration, but meanwhile everyone continues to pressure. Tyler heard the conversation, motionless. Part of him wanted to scream for them to leave him alone, to forget his existence. Another part, small but persistent, felt ashamed for causing so much. Concern. "I brought something that might interest him," said Mitchell after a pause. Tyler heard the sound of a folder being opened, papers being handled. "The preliminary investigation report," explained the businessman. "I got an advance copy through contacts." "And what does it say?" Sarah's voice trembled slightly. "It confirms that there was a structural failure in the left engine, exactly as Tyler identified even before the explosion. The aircraft's sensors only detected the problem 47 seconds after he tried to alert the crew." Tyler opened his eyes, surprised despite himself. "There's more," continued Mitchell. "The analysis of the black box confirms that the maneuvers executed during the emergency flight were technically impeccable, considering the circumstances, especially the decision to use the ground effect over the river to gain additional lift." Sarah let out a trembling sigh. "I always knew he was extraordinary. The technical commission is impressed, to say the least. They're calling it the Tyler case in the inner circles of aviation." Tyler slowly turned in the bed, finally abandoning the pretense of being asleep. Both adults looked in his direction, Sarah with hope, Mitchell with a cautious smile. "Why are you telling me this?" asked Tyler, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Because you deserve to know the truth," replied Mitchell, approaching. "What you did wasn't luck or coincidence. It was extraordinary, and now there's technical proof of that." Tyler sat up in bed, processing the information. A small spark reignited in his chest. Not exactly hope, but something close to it. "This doesn't change what happened in the simulator," he murmured. "I froze. I panicked." "Of course you did," said Sarah gently, sitting beside her son. "You're a child who went through a traumatic experience. No one should expect you to relive it so soon." "I spoke with the NTSB," intervened Mitchell. "I explained the situation and suggested a different approach. They agreed to postpone the formal tests, and when they happen, they will be conducted in a manner more appropriate to your age." Tyler absorbed the words in silence. His gaze wandered to the hotel window, where a commercial plane crossed the blue sky. The familiar tightness in his chest returned, not from panic this time, but from longing, from a deep desire that not even fear had managed to completely extinguish. "What if I never managed to get on a plane again?" he asked, verbalizing his deepest fear. "What if everything I studied, everything I loved is lost forever?" Before Sarah could respond, a knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Rachel, the flight attendant from flight GL4217, accompanied by a woman whom Tyler immediately recognized, Dr. Emily Parker, the aerospace engineer who had been with him in the cockpit during the emergency. "We hope we're not interrupting," said Rachel timidly. "We wanted to see how Tyler was doing." Sarah looked at her son, who nodded slightly, giving permission for them to enter. "We brought some people who would like to talk to you," explained Emily, entering the room. "They're waiting in the hotel lobby." "What people?" asked Sarah, instantly protective. "The passengers from the flight," replied Rachel. "Several of them organized a meeting today. They wanted to thank you personally." Tyler felt his heart accelerate. The idea of facing all those people, their looks, their expectations. "I don't know if I'm ready," he confessed. "You don't have to go down if you don't want to," assured Emily, sitting in the chair near the bed. "But I thought you should know. They're here, not to pressure or question, just to say thank you." A thoughtful silence filled the room. Tyler looked at his mother, seeking guidance. "It's your decision, son," Sarah said softly. At that moment, Mitchell's phone rang. He answered quickly, his face transforming into an expression of surprise as he listened. "I understand. Yes, he's here with me. Wait a moment." Covering the microphone, he turned to the others. "It's Captain Chris from the hospital. He insists on speaking with Tyler." Hesitantly, Tyler accepted the phone. "Hello? Tyler?" Chris's voice sounded animated, despite the obvious fatigue. "How are you, kid?" "I'm surviving," he responded honestly. "I heard about what happened in the simulator," said Chris, his voice softening. "I wanted you to know that I completely understand. My first time back in a cockpit after a serious incident was, well, let's say I needed 3 attempts." "Really?" Tyler felt a wave of relief knowing he wasn't alone in his fear. "Absolutely. Fear is part of the process. But it's not the end of the story, understand?" Chris paused. "I'm calling because I received the results of the NTSB tests. They analyzed the black box recording, compared it with computerized simulations. And?" Tyler barely breathed. "The official conclusion is that your actions saved the plane. More specifically, the ground effect maneuver you executed gave us the precious extra minutes we needed to reach Mr. Mitchell's property." Tyler closed his eyes, letting the technical confirmation penetrate through the layers of doubt he had built. "There's one more thing," continued Chris. "I'm being released from the hospital tomorrow, and I'd like to extend an invitation. The Civil Pilot Training Center in Miami has a simpler simulator, less intimidating than the Air Force's. I'm scheduled for some rehabilitation sessions there, and I thought, well, maybe you could accompany me. No pressure, no formal tests. Just you and me relearning to fly together." The proposal hung in the air like an extended hand, offering not just a second chance, but a different path, one that respected his pace, his limitations, his fear. "Can I think about it?" asked Tyler, his voice firmer than it had been in days. "Sure, kid, no rush." When the call ended, Tyler looked at the anxious faces around him, his mother, Mitchell, Emily, and Rachel, all waiting for some sign that the boy they knew still existed beneath the layers of trauma and doubt. "Are the passengers really down there?" he finally asked. Emily nodded. "They came from different parts of the country. Some brought their families." Tyler slowly rose from the bed, heading to the bathroom. "I need a few minutes to get ready." Sarah could barely contain her tears of relief. Are you sure, son?" "No," he admitted honestly, "but I think I need to face them at some point." 20 minutes later, Tyler descended in the elevator accompanied by his small entourage. His heart beat furiously against his chest and his hands trembled slightly, but there was a new determination in his steps. When the elevator doors opened in the lobby, the scene that awaited him momentarily left him breathless. Dozens of people were gathered, faces he recognized from the flight, some with bandaged arms or using crutches, but all alive, all present. Upon seeing him, a respectful silence fell over the group, followed by spontaneous applause. An elderly lady was the first to approach, the same one who had defended Tyler when Richard Mitchell questioned him. Without saying a word, she hugged him tightly, her tears wetting the boy's shoulder. "My granddaughter will be able to meet her great-grandmother thanks to you," she finally whispered. One by one, the passengers approached, some offering simple gifts, others just wanting to shake his hand or take a photo. Tyler accepted each gesture with growing surprise. These people didn't see him as a phenomenon to be studied or a media curiosity. For them, he was simply the boy who had helped bring them back to their families. "Would you like to say a few words?" Mitchell discreetly asked when the greetings diminished. Tyler hesitated. The old Tyler would have immediately refused, hiding behind his mother. But something had changed. Slowly, he nodded. "Can everyone hear me?" called Mitchell, and the lobby fell silent again. Tyler stepped forward, looking at the attentive faces. He saw gratitude, expectation, and something more, a genuine respect that transcended his age or social condition. He began, his voice failing. He took a deep breath and tried again. "I don't know what to say. For days, I've been wondering if what I did was real, if it wasn't just luck. I've been wondering if I deserve all this attention." Sarah placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, giving him strength to continue. "I still don't know the answer," he admitted, with surprising honesty. "But what I do know is that on that day, on the plane, we all did what we could. My mother risked her life in the lower compartment to fix the hydraulic system. Dr. Parker used all her knowledge to guide us. Captain Chris, even injured, guided us. Flight attendant Rachel kept calm and organized the evacuation. Even Mr. Mitchell used his tractor to stabilize the aircraft." Tyler paused, finding a clarity he hadn't felt in days. What happened wasn't the work of a single person. It was a joint effort of ordinary people doing extraordinary things under extreme pressure. A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Tyler felt something awakening inside him. Not the old childish dream, but something more mature, more aware. "I don't know if I'll fly a plane again," he continued. "I'm still afraid. I still have doubts. But today, seeing all of you, I understand that some things are bigger than fear." The words came out with growing conviction, as if he were discovering them in the very act of pronouncing them. "Captain Chris invited me to accompany him in a less intimidating simulator," he revealed, looking at his mother as he said this. "And I think I'll accept." Sarah squeezed his shoulder, her eyes shining with pride. That night, back in the hotel room, Tyler sat at the small desk with a notebook open in front of him. For the first time in days, he felt the impulse to write, to organize his thoughts. "What are you doing, son?" asked Sarah, bringing him a cup of hot chocolate. "Making a list," he replied, without raising his eyes from the paper. "Of things I need to face, one at a time." Sarah leaned over to see what he was writing. The first line said, "1 Simulator with Chris, tomorrow, 2 p.m. "Are you sure?" she asked, concerned that he was pressuring himself too much. Tyler slowly nodded. "I can't keep running away. The fear won't go away by itself." He continued writing, each item representing a small step back to the world he loved. Visiting an airport, watching a takeoff, eventually flying as a passenger again. When he finished the list, he added a last item, circled, "Discover who I really am and what I can do." The next morning, as he prepared to meet Chris, Tyler stopped in front of the bathroom mirror. The face that stared back at him seemed simultaneously younger and older than he remembered, the eyes carrying a knowledge that no child should have, but also a renewed determination. "Are you ready?" asked Sarah, standing at the door. Tyler took a deep breath, facing his reflection with honesty. "No," he admitted, "but I'm going anyway." Sarah smiled, recognizing in those simple words the return of the son she knew. Not the hero that the media had constructed, nor the victim that the doctors diagnosed, but the real Tyler, imperfect, scared, determined, and above all, incredibly courageous in his vulnerability. "Then let's go," she said, extending her hand. Together, they left the room, ready to face not just the simulator, but the first of many steps in a journey that neither could predict. The sky that Tyler loved so much was waiting for him, not as an easy conquest, but as a challenge to be faced one day at a time, one altitude at a time. 3 months had passed since that first day in the simulator with Chris, the civil pilot. Training Center in Miami had become a familiar place for Tyler, a space where he could gradually reconnect with his passion without the crushing pressure of external expectations. "Great work today," praised Chris as they ended another session. His arm, previously in a cast, now moved with almost total freedom. "Your response to the electrical failure scenario was impeccable," Tyler smiled shyly. Each small victory over fear was celebrated, each step forward acknowledged. "I'm feeling more comfortable." "More than comfortable," corrected Chris. "You're regaining your confidence. It's different." Outside the simulation room, Sarah waited, patiently as she did 3 times a week. Seeing her son emerge with a genuine smile, she felt her heart warm. Those first dark days after the incident seemed increasingly distant. "How was it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from her son's expression. "Good," replied Tyler with the modesty that continued to characterize him, despite everything. "Chris says I'm ready for the next step." The next step had been cautiously mentioned in recent weeks, the possibility of Tyler finally participating in the formal NTSB investigation, not as a suspect of an unlikely fraud, but as a valuable collaborator for understanding the incident. "Are you sure you're ready?" Sarah couldn't avoid the concern. The memory of her son, paralyzed with panic in the first simulator, still haunted her. "I think so," replied Tyler, with an honesty that had become his trademark. Not completely, but enough to try. The new approach of the NTSB, negotiated by Mitchell and supported by child psychology experts, was radically different from the first attempt. Instead of recreating the complete flight under clinical observation, Tyler would participate in a series of technical discussions, analyzing specific aspects of the incident in a comfortable environment without pressure. On the morning of the first session, Tyler surprised everyone by asking to visit the emergency landing site before starting the official procedures. "I need to see where everything happened," he explained, without the lenses of panic. Richard Mitchell's property was transformed. The area where the plane had landed was in the process of environmental recovery, but the signs of impact were still visible, a scar on the earth that was beginning to be covered by new vegetation. Tyler walked slowly along the landing path, followed at a distance by his mother, Mitchell, and a small group of investigators. He stopped at the point where the aircraft had finally come to a halt, looking around as if searching for something. "It was here," he murmured, more to himself than to others. Sarah approached cautiously. "What was here, son?" "Where I thought I was going to die," he replied simply, "and where I realized I was still alive." Those simple words carried an emotional weight that all present felt. It was a declaration of acceptance, of recognition of the reality of what had happened. Neither an unattainable miracle nor a random stroke of luck, but something real, tangible, human. In the improvised meeting room in the main house, Tyler surprised the investigators with his ability to technically analyze the incident. With the security of having Chris and Emily at his side, he reviewed each decision made during the flight, explaining his reasoning with impressive clarity. The choice to reduce altitude to use the ground effect was based on a documentary about emergency landings in the Rockies, he explained, pointing to the map. "I knew we needed to maximize gliding with the remaining engine overheating." The experts exchanged admiring looks, the intuitive understanding that Tyler demonstrated of the physical principles involved went far beyond the memorization of procedures. "It's as if he could visualize the airflows, the forces acting on the aircraft," commented one of the aeronautical engineers. "Extraordinary for any age, let alone for a 12-year-old boy." At the end of the day, the investigation coordinator gathered everyone for an announcement. "Based on the technical evidence and the testimonies collected, we are preparing the final report on the incident of Flight GL4217, he declared formally. "And I would like to inform that the actions taken by young Tyler will be officially recognized as decisive for the survival of the passengers and crew." A murmur of approval ran through the room. Tyler, seated between his mother and Chris, kept his eyes lowered, still uncomfortable with direct praise. "In addition," continued the coordinator, "I would like to make an unofficial announcement of a personal nature." Everyone looked with curiosity. "In my 30 years in aviation, I have never witnessed such an extraordinary combination of technical intuition and capacity for action under pressure. If you allow me the suggestion." He looked directly at Tyler. "I believe we have before us not just a momentary hero, but potentially one of the greatest talents our industry has ever seen." The silence that followed was broken by Sarah's calm voice. "Thank you for the recognition," she said, holding her son's hand. "But Tyler is still a child who needs to discover his own path, without the weight of excessive expectations." The coordinator nodded respectfully. "Certainly. I apologize if I sounded presumptuous." "You don't need to apologize," intervened Tyler, surprising everyone with his composure. "I appreciate your words, but my mother is right. I'm still discovering who I am and what I can do." That phrase, pronounced with surprising maturity, ended the session with a note of mutual respect, rarely seen between aeronautical authorities and someone so young. The following week, an official ceremony was organized in Washington, D.C. to honor all those involved in what the press was already calling the St. John's Miracle. Tyler, Sarah, Chris, Emily, Rachel, and even Richard Mitchell were decorated by the President of the Republic in a nationally broadcasted ceremony. When it was his turn to receive the medal, Tyler climbed the stage with firm steps, very different from the terrified boy who had left the simulator months before. "This medal represents the courage and extraordinary technical knowledge demonstrated in extreme circumstances," declared the President, placing the decoration around the boy's neck. "America is proud of you, Tyler." After the ceremony, away from the cameras and formal speeches, Richard Mitchell approached Tyler and Sarah with a folder in his hands. "As promised," he said, handing the documents to Sarah. "The scholarship is guaranteed regardless of the path Tyler chooses to follow. And the Invisible Talents Foundation is already operational, with 3 young people from peripheral communities receiving support to develop their potential." Sarah accepted the documents with tears in her eyes. "I never imagined something like this would be possible for us." "It's not charity," clarified Mitchell with unusual sincerity. "It's an investment in the future, and a way to repay what your son did for all of us." At the airport, while they waited for the flight that would take them back to Chicago, Tyler observed the aircraft landing and taking off with a different look. No longer just of childish fascination, but of deep understanding and respect. "What are you thinking about?" asked Sarah, noticing his contemplative expression. "About how everything has changed," he replied. "I still love planes. I still want to be in the sky. But now I know there's more to flight than just machines and physics." "What else is there?" Tyler smiled, finally finding the words for something he had always intuitively felt. "There are people, connected lives, decisions that matter." He paused, looking at the horizon through the wide windows of the terminal. "I think I understood that I don't just want to fly. I want to make a difference like we did that day." When the flight was announced, Tyler calmly stood up. It was the first time he would board a plane since the incident. Sarah observed him, attentively, ready to offer support at the slightest sign of panic. "Are you ready?" she asked, holding his hand. "I'm nervous," he admitted, "but it's a different kind of nervousness. It's not about fear anymore." "What is it about then?" Tyler thought for a moment, observing the other passengers in the boarding line. Families, executives, elderly people, each with their story, their dreams, their destinations. "It's about possibilities," he finally replied. "About all the paths that open when we face our fears instead of letting them define us." As they walked through the jet bridge toward the aircraft, Tyler felt each step as a small victory. The key, dramatic emergency landing would always be part of his story, as would the sudden fame, the crushing doubts, and the struggle to regain his confidence. But now he knew that these experiences weren't defining. They were just chapters of a much larger story that was just beginning. Upon entering the cabin, he took a deep breath, letting the familiar aroma of a commercial plane fill his senses. The flight attendant smiled upon recognizing him, but respectfully didn't make a fuss about his presence. Tyler headed for his seat by the window, the same side from where he had spotted the engine failure months before. A deliberate choice, a small act of defiance against the persistent trauma. When the plane began to taxi, Sarah held his hand, prepared for the worst. But Tyler just smiled, looking out the window with the same admiration he had always had, now tempered by experience but not diminished by it. "You know what's most amazing, Mum?" he murmured as the plane accelerated down the runway. "What?" "That even after everything, I still love flying, maybe even more than before." The aircraft took off smoothly, rising above the clouds toward the infinite sky that had always called to Tyler. And there, suspended between earth and sky, a boy who had briefly touched the impossible discovered that his true journey was just beginning. Dear listeners, we hope that Tyler's story has moved you as much as it moved us in narrating it. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories of overcoming and personal discovery. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you liked this narrative about a boy who found his strength in the skies, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life, its challenges and unexpected triumphs. Who is the Tyler in your life? Or perhaps you yourself are someone who has overcome impossible obstacles. Share your experiences